start with Dr. Varga in regard to the two nurses that were exposed. My understanding is one of the nurses, the first nurse, Ms. Span, was exposed in the emergency room. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
The first nurse was exposed in the emergency room. Is that correct?
No, that would not be correct. Nina was one of our ICU nurses and first came in contact with Mr. Duncan when Mr. Duncan was transferred from the emergency department up to the ED.
So that was sometime from September 28th to the 30th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then the second nurse, Ms. Vincent, was she also an ICU nurse?
That's correct.
Okay, so they were exposed after the point that we would have already started recognizing that Ebola was being questioned. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. The nurses in the MICU, from the time they had first contact with Mr. Duncan, were in personal protective equipment according to the CDC guidelines. Mm-hmm. Nina, but cared for Mr. Duncan.
Okay, Dr. Varga, I'm going to stop you right there. So they were already using universal precautions, but also had were using some of the more isolation. And just answer yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. To that, I'd like to move on, Dr. Frieden. This, of course, and I'll just back up. On October 6th, I sent a letter to the CDC, to CBP and HHS, calling for travel restrictions. So there's no question, I believe travel restrictions need to be put in place. And now, after having this subcommittee hearing, I believe even more strongly that we need them. And I just want to back up to a couple questions for Dr. Frieden and Dr. Fauci. Do we know the strain? Are there multiple strains of Ebola?
There are 5 different subspecies. This outbreak is one particular subspecies, Ebola Zaire, and all of the strains that we've seen have been closely related.
Okay, so we know that it's isolated to one particular strain.
Yes.
Now, you had mentioned, and I believe the quote was, unless it mutates, there will not be an outbreak here in the United States. Is that correct?
There will not be a large outbreak here, barring a mutation.
Well, the question I have is, when the nurses were using the protective gear, then how is this that this has happened? It tells me that something is changing here, and are we currently looking into this situation right now?
We're absolutely looking for other mutations or changes. What we've seen is very little change in the virus. We don't think it is spreading by any different way.
So and you've already said a couple of times that you don't believe that this is airborne, and yet, there again, I know how nurses are. I was one for 21 years before coming to Congress. You're protecting yourself, you're protecting your patient, you're protecting your family. They followed precautions, I am sure, and now we're having this conversation, and I'm very concerned about that.
We are confident this is not airborne transmission. These nurses were working very hard. They were working with a patient who was very ill, who was having lots of vomiting, lots of diarrhea. There was a lot of infectious material, and the investigation is ongoing, but we immediately implemented a series of measures to increase the level of safety.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Dr. Borio, in the discussion of fast-tracking a test for Ebola, where is the FDA on that? Or is there a fast-track process right now that you know of?
For diagnostic tests?
Yes.
Sure. So there are 3 diagnostic tests that are authorized for use under our EUA authorities. And we have also taken some proactive steps by contacting manufacturers, commercial manufacturers, who we know have potential interest technologies to be brought to bear here. And we reached out to a handful who might be interested in working with us.
Okay. So you're in the process of looking towards a fast-track process?
Yes, we would expedite every such test.
Great, thank you. And then Dr. Frieden, lastly, there again, I'm speaking on behalf of my constituents and every American in this country. I just don't believe that it is acceptable that the quote that you have given us, we won't be able to track them, as the reasoning for why we should not implement travel restrictions. I do believe we can. And Mr. Wagner, as far as our Customs and Border Patrol, do you believe that there is a way that we can implement tracking? Tracking of individuals if we do not allow them to come?
We have ways to determine a person's itinerary and travel history through the questioning or review of their passport. It's easier when they're coming on a direct ticket from those places.
True. But as you pointed out, they're coming from hundreds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for indulging my overtime here.
Now recognize